Good? Okay. Today we're going to be talking about A/B testing and really about how to master the conversion rates on your website. Now, A/B testing is a topic that a lot of marketers are really interested in, and it's a topic that a lot of marketers have kind of on their to-do list. But what I've found is that a lot of marketers start to kind of push it down their list. It's one of those things that never quite gets to the top of the list and ends up getting put off over and over and over again. And sometimes it just never really happens. It happens with digital marketers, and it happens with companies in general. And so what I wanted to cover today is some ways that you can put together an effective conversion optimization strategy, and how to, what kind of skill sets you'll need in order to run effective A/B testing campaigns. And we'll talk through some tools, some of the best tools to use, and a few other things. But first, I just want to kind of talk about what conversion rate optimization is. And so, so CRO, conversion rate optimization, it's a long-term strategy, and that's one thing that a lot of people don't understand. People look at A/B testing as a one-time thing. A lot of companies will say, well, we need a new home page on our site, so we'll run an A/B test and we'll figure out what the best design is. But the problem with that, you can have some great conversion lifts, but the problem with that is that running only one test doesn't really teach you a lot about your audience. And that's really what the purpose of A/B testing is finding out what your users want. And one test just doesn't cut it. And so, when you think about A/B testing and you think about conversion rate optimization, it's important to consider what a long-term strategy is going to look like and how you're going to continue learning once you get through your first round of testing. So there's a few resources or skill sets that are the major skill sets needed to run A/B testing. So first, you're going to need strategy and analytics. And when I say strategy, I mean somebody who can put together a long-term strategy, can prioritize testing opportunities, and dive into the analytics, figure out where there may be opportunities that are going missed, and then make sure that strategy gets executed. Where a lot of companies don't realize that they need resources is in the design and the development category. Design, may or may not be needed depending on the type of test that you run. But for bigger tests, obviously, when you're testing radical redesigns, when you're testing in how specific elements on a page are designed, you'll obviously want design. And development is a big one that companies miss out on. And I can't tell you how many companies get the strategy portion together. They have someone that's on the analytics front. They put together this really great testing strategy. They may even design the test. And then when it comes down to actually building the test in a testing tool, they go, oh, I didn't realize that there was some development needed here. Okay, well, I guess we'll queue it up with our developers. And then, as most companies are really scheduled out on development resources, it's one of those things that just never really happens because it's 3 months down the road. And so you want to make sure that as you're putting together a testing strategy initially, as you're going into as you're going to run your first A/B test, you want to make sure that you have these resources lined up and available. And maybe you have all of these skill sets yourself. But either way, you want to make sure that you've got all of these sections covered. Now, there's some really great testing tools out there, and I've mentioned on here probably the top 5. Adobe Target is my #1 favorite. I love Adobe Target. It has some great functionality. It's probably, in most conversion optimization experts' minds, it's the only testing tool. However, Adobe Target is very expensive. It's not a great place for companies to get started. because it's very cost prohibitive. Just for reference, you're probably looking at somewhere around $100,000 a year minimum to get started with Adobe Target. And so for a lot of smaller businesses, that just doesn't make sense. And Maximizer and SiteSpect are in kind of those same categories. They're fantastic. They have all of the functionality that you will ever need, but they're extremely expensive. Optimizely and VWO, or Visual Website Optimizer, are great starting points for companies. And Optimizely is usually where I recommend most of my clients start. Optimizely has almost all of the functionality you'll ever need in a testing tool. You can run just about any type of test in Optimizely. They have a free account you can get started with, which gives companies the ability to go in and play around with the tool, actually build your first test before you launch it, and that really helps businesses. Visual Website Optimizer has a lot of the same functionality, but I prefer starting with Optimizely. And this is the testing tool. So what these testing tools all do is they will all allow you to build alternative experiences inside the testing tool. So a lot of businesses don't understand, how an A/B test is run. Companies will say, oh, so do I build a bunch of different pages on my site and then I'm going to redirect traffic? And you can do that. You can build new pages on your site and use these tools to redirect traffic where you want them to go. But you can also actually develop inside the testing tool. So, what Optimizely will do, for example, is Optimizely will go and it will crawl whatever page on your site you want to test. It will pull the code of your existing page into the tool, and then you can duplicate that page and modify it from there. And then once you launch a test, if you build it inside of the testing tool, you don't have to redirect traffic. It's all run on the same URL, and it will just split your traffic randomly between these different experiences that you've built. So if you have 2 experiences, then traffic will get split 50-50. If you've got 4 experiences, then each variation will get 25%, or you can modify the percentage of traffic that goes to these different experiences. So that's a really basic, overview of testing tools. Now, you'll want additional tools as well as you start to analyze your traffic behavior, and as you start running tests, you'll want to be able to dive in and get a little bit more information from your users. And so there's some really great additional tools that you'll want to use. Now, I put Google Analytics here because sadly enough, I work with a lot of companies that don't even have Google Analytics installed. So hopefully, most of you guys already have Google Analytics, and that's a no-brainer. But you want to make sure that you have some kind of website analytics tool installed. So you could use Adobe Site Catalyst tool, or there's a lot of other analytics tools. Now, Crazy Egg and ClickTail are 2 of many. They're called heat mapping tools, and these tools are fantastic for figuring out what users are doing on your page. So, and ClickTail is probably my top recommended tool. Again, like Adobe Target, ClickTail is very cost prohibitive. It can get really expensive, but it has a lot of great functionality. So a few of the things that it will do are it will give you a scroll map, so it will show you how far down your pages people are scrolling. And that's a really great feature because a lot of companies assume that users are scrolling below the fold. And so you want to get those scroll maps on your page and figure out how far down the page are people actually scrolling. What are people seeing on my site? They also have click maps, so it will show you exactly where on the page people are clicking. What I find with a lot of companies are people are trying to click on things that aren't actually links. So they might be trying to click on images or headlines that maybe you have blue headlines on your site, and that confuses people sometimes. Or maybe you have things that look like buttons on your site that aren't. So those types of things are really great to figure out where are users having problems on my page right now and where are opportunities for improvement. Now, ClickTail also will record live user sessions, so you can actually watch a user scroll across your site, and you watch their mouse scrolling across pages on your site. You can watch their experience in real time and kind of see how people are engaging with your page, see where people are leaving, those types of things. And then one additional thing that QuickTail has that I love is they have a really great form abandonment tracking tool. Now you can do that in Google Analytics. You can track form abandonment and specific form field engagement, but it's not a very good report. And I don't really like using Google Analytics for form abandonment tracking. So QuickTail does a really good job of visualizing your form abandonment. It'll show you a full form flow, and then it will also show you which specific fields people are engaging with, how long they typically spend on those fields, where your highest dropout rates are on your forms. And those are all great things to know as you start testing, because you want to figure out where users are having problems on your site. Now, additionally to those, so Unbounce, they have a great tool basically to just build out landing pages. It's kind of a drag and drop WYSIWYG editor, really easy to build landing pages without having significant design and development. That's actually how I got started in the A/B testing space was I built out a couple of landing pages in Unbounce, and they have a really, really simple traffic splitting function. It's not, they don't really offer any analytics or anything like that, but Unbounce is great if you want to build out additional experiences to test. And then Kissmetrics just has a ton of great additional insights that you can get from your users if you want to dive a little bit deeper into on-site metrics. So we've got one more thing that I wanted to mention. So Brooks Bell, they're a testing company based out of the US, and they have on this link, if you follow this link, they've got some really great testing resources as you get started testing. Particularly, they have some really good worksheets that you can go through, and they help you think through your testing opportunities. So they'll help you prioritize testing opportunities. They'll help you identify where some testing opportunities might be. They'll help you get buy-in from, if you're working for someone else, they'll help you get buy-in from your boss, help you prove ROI, those types of things. So they have some really great resources there. All right, so we've got the resources down, we've got the tools. Now, before you start building that test, you want to make sure that you know what you're going to test and why. Now, this is a big area that I find a lot of companies really missing the boat on. A lot of companies that I've worked with that have tried doing A/B testing before and have not been successful, the mistake that they make a lot of times is they get really blindsided and they get a lot of tunnel vision because they think that they need to test something, but they're not really going off of what their users want, right? And so here's an example. I work with a company now that prior to working with me, they had run a few A/B tests. And when I first met them, they said, Chris, we're not really sure that A/B testing even works for our site. And I said, oh, really? How come? And they said, well, we've run a couple of A/B tests and nothing happened. We didn't generate any results. One of the tests lost. So one of the tests produced a lower conversion rate, and we ran another test, and it was flat. The experiences were the same. And I said, okay, well, what kind of tests were you guys running? And they started to describe some of these tests, and they were testing things that were way, way down the list in my book. So they were testing things like text in their footer, right? Or links that they put in the footer of the site. They had a widget that was on their home page, but it was really far down the page. If you scroll down, they were testing how they display this widget. And once we installed some scroll mapping on their site, we found out no one was even scrolling down and using that widget in the first place. And so it's no wonder they weren't generating an increase in conversion rates. They were testing something that people didn't really care about. And so you want to make sure that you've got very clearly defined objectives with your tests, and that you're really trying to focus on what the user likely wants from your site and not what you want. Again, I find a lot of companies that go, oh, we just hate our home page, and so we just want to redesign it so it looks better, right? And and that may be your goal, is to make it look better. But I try to encourage companies to dive a little bit deeper than that. Okay, so you want it to look better. Why? Why should it look better? Do your users not like something about the way that it's designed, or does it just drive you crazy to see it every day? Because nobody likes their website. After a while, you just hate seeing the same thing over and over. So anyways, I've drilled that point home, but you want to make sure you think about what you're going to test and why you're going to test it. So this is kind of what can happen if you don't think about things, if you don't think about what you're going to test. So this is a client of mine, and this is their mobile experience. And so we came in, we started working with them, and the first thing that they said we needed to test was headlines. So this was a PPC landing page. They were running PPC traffic here. They said, let's test matching the headline with the search term. And so we ran a headline test. We did dynamic keyword insertion on the page, and they were convinced that this was the test. This was the end-all, be-all test. This was going to totally change their landing pages forever. And we had a 2.5% lift in conversion rate, which in my book isn't really even a lift. And so after this test, then we revisited and went, okay, well, that didn't work very well. Why didn't it work? And after we did a little bit more research, we realized, you know what, the mobile experience just really isn't very good. We have much larger opportunities in front of us. So we followed this test up with a radical redesign test. We tested a completely new mobile experience, and we ended up having massive increases to both form completion and call volume. And you can notice that, I mean, a lot of things that just look a lot better about this mobile experience that we tested in. But what happened was, again, we had blinders on initially. The client was so focused on headlines, and that's what can happen sometimes if the PPC, whoever's running the PPC campaigns, is also running the CRO efforts. With PPC, headlines are a huge deal, right? And for some clients, I've had clients where running headline tests see significant increases in conversion rates. But you want to make sure that you're looking at what is likely the biggest area of opportunity for you. And it's not always these small elements on your page. Now, mobile first is another thing that I find a lot of companies talking about. Mobile is obviously a big deal, right? We hear about it all the time. That's almost all marketers talk about these days is mobile experiences. Google had their big scary Mobilegeddon update, which didn't really affect a whole lot, but did actually have a lot of implications for mobile experiences. But a lot of companies go by this mentality of mobile first, right? And mobile first is where you design your site. Oops, excuse me. I don't know what just happened there. I think I accidentally skipped all the way to the end. So mobile first is where you design your pages for a mobile device first, and then you expand it to look good on a desktop device. And this can work for some audiences. Sorry, we're just trying to get back to the slide that we're on here. But not for every audience. So I ask clients of mine to look at your data. So yes, mobile is a big deal. Yes, mobile is the fastest growing online segment of traffic. But if your audience isn't highly mobile, if your audience isn't converting on mobile, then you don't want to focus on mobile first. You want to make sure that you are focusing in the areas where your users are spending their time. So here's an example of a client of mine that spends significant amount of money on traffic, and but only 17% of their traffic is mobile. Right? I mean, it's still a substantial amount of traffic, but desktop traffic is by far their highest area of opportunity. Right? And so if they were to design all of their pages for mobile first and always think about testing mobile first, they would be missing out on their biggest area of opportunity. And actually, when I started working with these guys, that's exactly what they said. They said, well, we need to focus on our mobile experience. Our mobile experience sucks. We haven't really done anything with it. It's responsive, but it doesn't look very good. And when we kind of looked at the data, we said, yeah, we do need to test on mobile, but we need to focus on testing desktop and even tablet above mobile. Now, fortunately, because they were working with us, we were able to test all three. But for a lot of companies and a lot of you guys will only have enough resources to maybe do one test at a time. And so if you can only do one test at a time, you need to make sure that you're focusing your attention on your biggest area of opportunity. Now, this is another client of mine. This client obviously needs to focus on mobile first, right? So, about 60% of their traffic is mobile. And so they absolutely need to take a mobile first approach. They need to look at designing their landing pages on the mobile, designing their mobile design first, and then thinking about their desktop design. They need to think about testing mobile first. And so anyways, the point I'm trying to make is you want to make sure and look at your data and figure out where are your users actually spending time? Where are your biggest areas of opportunity? So we've gotten through kind of the basis. So we've got our resources, right? We've got our strategy, we've got design resources, we've got development, we've got our testing tool in place, we've got some other analytics tools in place. We've made sure that we have we've made sure and we've consulted our data and made sure that we're hitting our biggest areas of opportunity first. Now, a lot of companies would just dive right in and start building that test. But before you start building that test, you want to get a process in place. Okay, so now we're going to talk about creating a testing strategy. And this is kind of a general strategy that I recommend for my clients. And there's obviously a lot more depth that is put into this, but this is a high-level overview of what a great testing strategy can look like. So we talked about the research and the strategy phase up top. And again, this is where you're going to prioritize. You're going to identify what pages on your site need to get tested the most, right? I mean, that's an area that a lot of companies miss. If you've got 4 or 5 important pages on your site, or if you've got a checkout funnel that is 4 or 5 steps long, you want to make sure that you are starting your testing on the biggest area of opportunity first so that you get your biggest impact. So once you've kind of done your research, you figured out, you know that you're testing your biggest area of opportunity, you've got your strategy in place for how to execute that test. The first test I recommend running is a radical redesign test. Now this is actually, that was the topic of my presentation at MozCon. And so if you want to learn a little bit more about creating a radical redesign test, go and check out my MozCon presentation. But I always recommend my clients start out with a radical redesign test. Because if you want to go into A/B testing, before you start testing some of those small elements, you want to make sure you've got a good foundation. You want to make sure that the design of your page isn't based on false assumptions, right? Because a lot of companies will design their landing pages with best practices in mind, right? And we've got to have X, Y, and Z on this page. And so a radical redesign test is a really good way to start out your testing and challenge some of those assumptions and go, is this really what our page should look like, right? Now, after your radical redesign test, you'll want to go in and you'll want to analyze your test, right? So you want to think about what did we learn from this radical redesign test? What did we learn about our users? What did we learn about our site design in general? And then once you've kind of taken that, and you can learn a lot from a radical redesign test, and even if you don't have a winner, so let's say that you tested 3 or 4 radically different versions of a page and you don't have a winner, what did you learn? What did your users not like? What were you testing in that radical redesign that your users didn't respond well to? And that can help drive this next round of testing, which is iterative testing. Now, iterative testing is some of those smaller elements, but this is probably the most crucial phase of A/B testing, because iterative testing is where you're going to find out what specific elements on your page are driving conversions for your users. So iterative testing is where you're going to go and you're going to test everything on that page design. So you're going to run a round of headline testing. You're going to test images. You're going to test your call to action. You're going to test your colors. You're going to test everything on that page should get its own test. You should make sure that you're testing out multiple different versions of each thing that you test. And what you'll start to find over time is you'll start to figure out what specific things are important to your users. So I showed a test where headlines were not important to the users. I have another client of mine where every time we do a round of headline testing, we see a 20 to 30% lift in conversion rates. So for that audience, headlines are very important. The users want some of that immediate reinforcement that they're on the right page, that they are looking at the right content. Uh, Similarly, I have other clients where they'll have images on their page, and testing those images, testing what image you display, has huge impact on conversion rate. And other clients of mine, it doesn't. And so what you'll find is that by doing iterative testing, you'll start to figure out what your highest impact elements are. And that will help you prioritize as you go around this testing cycle the second time. And you go, last time, content was our number one thing. So let's test content first. And last time, headlines weren't a big deal. So let's have that be one of the last things that we test, right? You want to make sure that you're starting with your highest impact tests. So then again, after you finish this cycle, you want to go ahead and review and then start the cycle over again. And I've put in the middle that this whole process should take no more than 6 months. And that's not an arbitrary number that I just made up. 6 months is about how long we have found it takes your users, almost across the web, no matter what the vertical is. 6 months is about how long it takes users to change their behavior on the web. And so about every 6 months, your users will have changed enough that you want to go back and test everything again. Now, you don't want to run the same tests, but you want to go back and do another round of radical redesign testing, and you want to go back and test everything on your page again. And the reason that user behavior changes about every 6 months is because about every 6 months, there's new design best practices on the web, right? And the important thing to remember is something that has become a best practice is no longer a best practice. So once other websites have decided to adopt certain design elements or certain call to action or certain strategies on their site, as soon as sites across the web are all adopting those strategies, it's no longer effective because your users are seeing them everywhere. And when your users see something everywhere, they start to ignore it. And so you want to be constantly going around and doing a testing cycle every 6 months on your key pages of your site to make sure that you're staying on top of that changing user behavior. So the question that that I want you guys to ask, and the question that's most important to ask as you're going through A/B testing, is what do my users want? Right? That is the only goal of doing A/B testing. Find out what do my users want for my site. And that's, again, I have to keep reiterating that because a lot of businesses that I work with, when they start running A/B tests, they're thinking about what do I want on the site. I want to validate that my idea is right. I want to, I think that we need pink ponies on every single page. And so I'm going to prove it to you guys by running an A/B test, right? But again, the idea behind A/B testing is finding out what the user wants, to design better user experiences on sites. And so you want to make sure that you're thinking about that question as you're testing. Now, this little GIF here, I don't think it works, but the GIF is this guy's just pushing this click to call button over and over again, and it's not calling, right? I mean, that's a huge problem, and it still happens on the web, right? And so that's an obvious area. Your users want something. They're trying to click. They're trying to call you, and if they can't, that's a terrible experience. And so you want to test something that improves that. So here's an example of a test like that. So this is a mobile test that we ran for a client. You can see that our control is, that's our desktop responsive version. And so, we took what was on the desktop site, we shrunk it down. So the desktop site had 4 images, and so we had those same 4 images. The desktop site had that form. So there was a click to call button that was way down on the control page, way down the page, but it was kind of an afterthought. Our winner was a custom mobile experience. So instead of having a responsive design that looked kind of like the desktop site, we had our mobile site be completely custom. So we thought about the mobile experience. We tested actually 3 different mobile experiences. This was the winner. And you can see there's a lot of differences, right? There's not as many images, so most of the images are gone. The text, I mean, it doesn't look great on this slide, but the text looks much better on a mobile device. It's more readable, it's bigger. The click to call button is the first thing that the users see, because what we found is that, and what we found from this test is that's what users want. Users wanted to call in, and they want to be able to call in easily. And so if your users want to call you and they have to dig around your site for a click to call button, they're going to be frustrated and you're going to lose a lot of conversions. If your users want if they want a buy now button and they have to scroll way down the page to find it, that's going to be frustrating to them. So you want to figure out where are the best places to put things on the site. And you can notice that this test had a tremendous impact in both form completions and call-ins. And so again, we need to think about the user experience, because if we hadn't thought about the user experience, if we hadn't asked ourselves, what do the users want from this page, then we probably would have just redesigned that desktop responsive page and just done one that looked kind of similar but a little bit better. All right, so think about what your users want. Think about what's going to make the user experience better, and really try to understand what they're looking for. I think I've iterated that enough. So how do you know what your users want? Again, we mentioned some tools. So this is a heat map. This is actually Crazy Eggs heat map, a scroll map, sorry. And you can see the percentage of people that are scrolling up and down the page, right? So you can see 100% of the traffic is there above the fold. As soon as you get below the fold, you get less than 20% of the traffic that's scrolling down. Now, they had a ton of call to action buttons that were down there. Nobody was engaging with them. And so we ran a test where we just removed some of that content that was down below the fold. We had a 63% lift in form completions. And then we found another interesting thing. We had a 530% increase in email subscriptions. Now, that was all the way down at the bottom of the page. In the client's mind, that wasn't really very important at all. But on this page, people were looking for that. Or at least people were interested in subscribing on this page. And so, again, if you think about your user experience, you're willing to test, you're willing to think outside the box, you'll start to find some of these interesting things that your users are looking for, and this will help drive future rounds of testing, right? So, I mean, this test obviously brings up a lot of additional potential tests, right? What do we put to the left of the form? Should we have that image there? Should we have a video? Should we just have content? Do we need those other call to actions below the form? Should the email subscribe field be its own form on the page, right? There's lots of things that come out of this test that we can think about going forward that can drive our future rounds of testing. Now, just a few areas to consider. These are usually some of the things that are highest impact tests in my experience. Now, obviously, you'll need to test these on your own traffic to figure out what your users respond best to. But these are some of the areas that I've found typically yield the highest impact for tests. So testing your headlines, testing your call to action phrasing and placement, testing images, whether or not you have images and what the images are, the layout of the page, custom mobile experiences. I'm not going to go through all of these, but again, these are some things that you want to try, and what you'll find is that some of them work for your audience, some of them don't. But again, you want to make sure and just try everything. Now, the final thing that I'm going to hit here is you want to run major tests for at least 2 weeks. Now, in the A/B testing space, it's best practice to run a test until you get a 95% statistical significance. And every testing tool out there, so Optimizely, Visual Website Optimizer, Adobe Target, they all will report that for you. So you don't even need to calculate any of the statistical stuff. They'll report it for you. They'll tell you how much statistical confidence they have in the results. But the problem is that you can get a 95% statistical significance pretty quickly sometimes, especially for some of those bigger tests, like the mobile test that I showed you that had like a 300% lift in form completions. We got a 95% statistical significance in like 2 days from that test. But the problem is, if you call a test after 2 days, there's a lot of other things that you didn't test, right? You didn't get at least 1 day of the week in there, right? There's likely, and there, not only is there likely, but there's erratic conversion rates during the first few days of a big test. And here's an example that I'll show. So this is a radical redesign test that we ran. So the green line at the bottom of the graph is the control. So that was the existing web page. The blue and the pink lines were some of the alternative experiences that we had designed and were testing. And you can see that after the end of the first week, our two experiences were tied. We had a 95% statistical significance at this point. And so what most companies would do at this point, most companies would say, okay, we've already run it for a week. We already have a 95% statistical significance. Let's just run it for a couple days, a couple more days, and see which one pulls ahead, and then we'll call it as soon as a winner pulls ahead. And into that second week, you'll notice that experience B, the blue line, pulled ahead for that entire next week. But if we were being jumpy like most companies are, and we had called the test at this point, we would have called the wrong winner. Because you notice the conversion rates are still fluctuating wildly. Into the third week, the conversion rates started to normalize, and that's when experience C, the pink line, finally pulled ahead. And then you can notice that towards the end of that test, experience C was by far the winner, almost by double the control. But if we had been trying to hurry our test up, trying to call a winner as fast as possible, we would have missed out on the true winner. We would have called the wrong winner. And so it's important to run tests for long enough that that data starts to normalize and you stop seeing conversion rates fluctuating rapidly. So the last thing that I just want to say is don't give up. Okay, so I can't tell you how many companies that I work with give up after their first test because they aren't able to provide a winning experience. Keep testing, keep experimenting as long as it takes, because what I can promise you and what I can guarantee from running hundreds of A/B tests, there is always lift percentage to be found. There is always an increase that you can find in the conversion rates of your website. If you're having a hard time finding those opportunities, then reach out to an expert and to an agency and get some help. But what I can guarantee is that there's always improvements that can be made. And if you will continue experimenting until you find a winner, then what you'll start to do is you'll start to create a better experience for your users. And again, the whole purpose of this is to find what your users want and to find ways that you can present your page that will provide a great experience to your users. So that's all I have for the webinar today. So if you guys have any questions, I'd love to answer a few questions. If you guys want to chat in some questions, I'd be happy to answer any questions you guys have, whether it's about tools or about strategies. If you guys have run some tests and have had problems, I'm happy to answer any questions that you have. So we have our first question here that says, do we need a relevant sample for A/B testing or to take into all users or visitors? So if I'm understanding the question right, I think you're asking, should you test on all of your users, or do you need to, or is there a specific sample size that you need? So I'll answer that question, and then there's another potential question that comes up from that. But so I typically run tests on all traffic, and you'll separate a percentage of your traffic to each of the experiences. Now, with certain clients, you'll start to find that some segments of your traffic will perform very differently. So, for example, a lot of times mobile traffic will perform completely different than desktop traffic. And so in those cases, you may want to separate your mobile and your desktop tests. And I've seen, and a lot of my clients even have very different results, even on the same page within different traffic segments. So their PPC traffic performs different than their social traffic. Their social traffic performs different than their organic traffic. And in those cases, again, you'll want to separate those out and test specifically one specific test on your organic visitors, one specific test on your PPC traffic. And the way to calculate how much traffic you'll need to be a relevant sample size, Optimizely actually has a really great tool. If you Google Optimizely sample size calculator, Optimizely has a great calculator. You can put in what the current conversion rate is on your site. You can put in what the expected lift percentage is, and then they'll tell you how many visitors you need to have a relevant sample size. So that's a great way to calculate upfront and know how long you're going to need to run a test for. Because again, if the sample size that you need is 10,000 visits and you get 100 visits per day, you'll need to run that test for quite a long time, right? And so those are things that you just want to keep in mind. And it's super important to calculate those things up front, because again, if you know what the sample size is that you need, you won't call the test too early. So very, very good question. So we have another question here that says, what budget cap do you have for A/B testing, and what percentage of sales volume what percentage of sales volume or expected revenue? Let's see here. So if I understand the question right, I think what you're asking is, should you, how do you set a budget for A/B testing? I think that's the question that's being asked here. So should your budget be a percentage of your sales volume, or should it be a percentage of your expected revenue? And that's another really good question. And that's actually one of the first things that I do when my company starts working with clients is we will calculate an anticipated lift percentage. So this can actually really help you to prioritize testing opportunities as well. What you can do is you take the current traffic of your page and you multiply that by the current conversion rate of your page, and that will give you, some number. And then you can multiply that number by some hypothetical lift percentage, so maybe a 10% lift percentage. And what that will do is that will tell you, if we have a 10% lift on this page and on this page and on this page, what will the result be, right? Which one, if we had a 10% lift on every page of our site, which one would be the best one for us to have a lift on, to have a 10% lift on? And then what you can do is you can compare that to the current revenue that the page provides, right? So, I mean, you can understand, if I get a 10% lift on this page, if right now we're generating $10,000 per month on this page, if we get a 10% lift on $10,000, then we'll now be making $11,000 on this page, right? So we'll increase sales by $1,000 a month. So that kind of helps you to calculate what your budget should be, right? So if a 10% lift will give you a $1,000 increase in revenue, then you can go, okay, that's worth $1,000 a month to me. How much do I want to spend on conversion optimization, right? So if I get a $1,000 a month increase, then I can probably afford to spend at least $3,000 on A/B tests, because if I generate a 10% lift, that's going to play out month over month over month, and it will continue to repay. But that is absolutely something you want to take into consideration. In fact, I had a call yesterday with a potential client, and they were really struggling through the budget side of things. And so I asked them, I said, so okay, if we increased the revenue that this page generates, if we increased it by 10%, how much would that increase your revenue overall? And it was only a couple $100. I mean, the page wasn't generating very much revenue at the time. And so we decided it didn't make sense to run A/B tests right then, because it wasn't going to provide enough of an ROI to cover the cost of A/B testing. But that's absolutely something that you want to go through and look at is, does it make sense? Is this going to generate enough of an ROI to cover the costs that we're gonna incur from A/B testing? But very good question. I hope that answered the question. Any other questions? Okay, I think that's it.
Hi
Guys,
guys, do we have
feel free to reach
more
out to me on Twitter as
questions?
well.
Yeah, more questions? No questions? No goes. Thank you, was very interesting. Thank you, Chris. Well, I guess it's also a thank you message. You still have a possibility to ask Chris question right now. If you can't, you can reach him. His Twitter was all the time on the screen, and it's not. Yeah, it still is. Okay, so you can reach him on Twitter. So okay, I'll join audience, and I say thank you, Chris, for very interesting presentation today. For me, it was I actually thought the A/B test is just once you've done it and forgot about it, but okay, it's not like that. Now I know. So and I just remind you that we recorded this webinar, so I will upload it on our webpage and our YouTube channel in a couple of days, so you can enjoy. I'll send everybody who's registered. I will send the link. Okay, thank you very much, Chris. So hopefully
Thank
we
you,
can
guys.
see you. You can see you again here in a couple of months with something new.
Absolutely. I appreciate it. Thanks, guys.
Okay, thank you very much. Thank you very much for everybody who came here tonight. And thank you and goodbye.